Alrighty, thank you so much for joining me. And we're trying to go through. I saw this breaking news feature. It said war with Iran, 3 Americans killed. There's some craziness happening, and in my community, I want to share this video with you that we can be in prayer for the Middle East, prayer for Israel, prayer for this whole region, for peace. There's some crazy things happening, and I'm reminded several years ago when President Trump was in his first term, and there was actually um, the United States sent a drone really close to Iran, and I think it actually crossed the border, and Iran shot it down, and American people, uh, war-hungry politicians were like, "Let's go to a war with Iran," and Trump stopped it. He wanted to bring about peace. Right now, the people in charge, they want war. They want more of it. And so think about this in our next election. I'm not saying Trump is the answer, but vote. There's so many people who are wanting war, and there's other people who are not wanting war. So I would encourage you to think about that when you go to the polls. Let's see what's actually going on right now. Again, this is breaking news. What's going on in Iran right now?
3 U.S. service members killed, more than 30 injured. An attack by Iranian-backed militia against a U.S. base in Jordan is raising the stakes in the Middle East.
President Bush pledges the United States will respond to the attack. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the escalation raises the risk of a direct conflict between the United States and Iran.
At an event in South Carolina, President Biden announced the U.S. would choose the time and place for its response.
I'm asking for public silence for all 3 of those fallen soldiers. And we shall respond. God bless you all.
The attack also wounded at least 30 soldiers. The base is located in Jordan, near the borders of Syria and Iraq. It serves as a special operations base to fight ISIS. Iranian-backed militias have attacked U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq more than 170 times since October 17th. The American deaths raise the stakes dramatically in the region.
It's quite clear that the whole players in the region are actually looking to see what will be the United States reaction to that.
Some congressional leaders are calling on Biden to impose crippling costs on the regime, including military strikes inside Iran. Israeli and U.S. conflicts against Iran proxies are spread throughout the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, who continue attack shipping in and around the Red Sea, and Hamas in Gaza. Avi Melamed is a former Israeli intelligence official. He says the source address of all the conflicts in the region is Iran.
This is the Mullah regime in Tehran. We have today sample of the disastrous vision and future that waits the Middle East and the world if the Mullah regime is not going to be restrained forcefully.
Also over the weekend, the U.S., along with a number of other countries, suspended funding to UNRWA. The New York Times reported Israel presented evidence that UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th attacks, which killed more than 1,200 Israelis. The White House said the suspension of aid might be a first step.
We'll certainly consider additional, depending on the investigation, whether that requires any additional changes in the way we support UNRWA going forward.
The UN says it's investigating the charges, but critics of UNRWA said it's been part of the problem, not the solution, for a long time. Adi Schwartz is the co-author of The War of Return.
I just want to remind you that cases of people working for UNRWA and at the same time working for terrorist organization has begun in the 60s.
Meanwhile, negotiations continue to release the more than 100 hostages in Hamas captivity. Israel said talks have been constructive, but there are still significant gaps. The deal would include a pause in the fighting in exchange for the release of some or all of the hostages.
Well, Chris Mitchell joins us now with more from Jerusalem. It's obvious that I don't think anybody, but everyone I talk to in the U.S. doesn't want to escalate this into a war. But it seems like Biden may be forced to. What are the pros and cons of directly striking Iran?
Well, Gordon, right now the region's really waiting to see how the U.S. is going to react because of Sunday's attack. And the 170 attacks on the U.S. bases since mid-October, many Mideast observers here believe that the U.S. is going to respond forcefully. One of the cons is that it would escalate the situation, Gordon. On the other hand, one of the things you have to regard is that if the U.S. doesn't respond forcefully, it's going to make the U.S. perceived as weak, as more than it is right now. So you have to weigh both the pros and the cons here. The Joint Chiefs of Staff is saying that they just want to escalate the situation. It might not be possible to de-escalate the situation now because Iran keeps pressing the envelope, not only in the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, but also the Houthis. So it looks like right now the whole region could be on a knife's edge and see how the U.S. is going to react.
Well, a lot of international law has been quoted recently. So just
as we're going through this, I don't have the answers, but I just want to encourage you, be in prayer about this stuff. I wish we weren't in this position. I think we've made some mistakes to get to this position. And now that we are in this position, let's be praying.
Under international law, what the Houthis are doing, firing missiles at international shipping, is an act of war. And under international law, there needs to be a response to that. What Iran is doing through its proxies to attack U.S. troops in Iraq and now in Jordan, Syria, those are acts of war. And so if we don't respond appropriately, I can't help but think that the entire region, the entire world will think that we're weak, and it will embolden all kinds of actions, not just in the Middle East. What's the Israel government saying about the American response?
Well, they're waiting, I think, for the kind of response we're going to get right now from the U.S., whether it's, the President Biden said it's going to be a time of their choosing and the way they're going to respond. But I think Israel would feel like the U.S. really has to step forward and have a strong response in order to have some deterrence against Iran and its proxies. And if it doesn't, it seems like these attacks by the Houthis, by the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, by Hezbollah, they will just keep increasing until the U.S. really does respond. I've been reading recently about how President Reagan back in the 80s responded to Libya and tried and deterred them. So we'll just see what the U.S. does. But right now, the U.S. is perceived as fairly weak in the region, and it's really a crossroads right now to see how the administration is going to respond.
Well, let's talk about UNRWA and UNRWA paying salaries to terrorists. You've been reporting on this for years, and it looks like the world is finally waking up to it. But this is even more extreme. There's a report that UNRWA workers were actually the terrorists taking part in the October 7th attack. What is that doing to world opinion? What do you think the future of UNRWA is?
Well, we'll see, Gordon. In fact, Adi Schwartz, the expert that we talked to in our report, he was saying that UNRWA employees were actually implicated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and beyond, terrorist members from the PLO. That was then. Today it's Hamas, and it's estimated about 10% of UNRWA employees are affiliated with terror groups, whether Hamas or Islamic Jihad, and 12 implicated in October 7th to the murder of Jews. The original mandate began in 1949. It was supposed to last 18 months. It's lasted 75 years. And UNRWA has a different definition of any other UN agency. So instead of shrinking the refugees, they now have grown from 200,000 to about 6 million. And critics say it really just perpetuates the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because what they're teaching, and we've reported on this for many years, that this generation after generation, the goal is to undo the state of Israel, to kill Jews. We have, children on camera saying that just outright. And it's really the embodiment of the chanting from the river to the sea that we hear in rallies all over the world. Many say it's time to stop the funding and dismantle UNRWA.
Well, I've been saying it for a long time, and I think it's about time that people in the State Department start saying it. I just can't imagine that the U.S. intelligence services and the U.S. State Department didn't know it. It makes me wonder, why in the world would you continue sending U.S. taxpayer dollars to fund it? It makes no sense. Is there some kind of double standard here?
Oh, definitely. I think, more than $300 million in U.S. tax money is going to UNRWA just this year. Billions over the number of years, and there does seem to be some sort of a double standard, and there have been many, including yourself, and there's been members of the Knesset. David Bedin is one of the people here in the land who's been the voice crying in the wilderness for many years that what actually is doing. And if you just listen to the children especially talking about their goal is to go back to Tel Aviv, go back to Haifa. We want to take over all of Israel, and we want to kill the Jews. And that is what's been perpetuating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and not solving it.
Well, Chris, thanks for your insight, and thanks for all you're doing to report on what's happening in Israel today. For you at home, make sure you let your congressman and your senator know how you feel about this, that our tax dollars going to fund terrorism, where there's now proof that UNRWA employees weren't just educating, weren't just participating, weren't just on Hamas payroll in addition to UNRWA payroll, but they actually participated in the attack. This has to stop. UNRWA needs to go away and never come back. And you're going to hear back repeatedly in the news going forward about some humanitarian crisis, all of that. Well, if Gaza had paid attention to their own people, if they, instead of building tunnels and weapons facilities and the ability to launch rockets at Israel, they would have had plenty of money to take care of their own people. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is completely the fault of Hamas.
So this is some pretty crazy stuff. I don't know. Got to do some more research into this UNRWA thing. But for now, just want to encourage y'all to be in prayer about this. Let's just stop for just a minute, Lord. We do want to lift up the Middle East. We want to lift up Israel, all these different conflicts around. Just asking for your will to be done.